Rina and Maia Dee were shot dead in the West Bank on their way to a family holiday.
Maia no answer, Rina no answer.
The three of them were travelling in a car when a gunman opened fire
When
on
Palestinian
them.
terrorists opened fire.
Spotted our suitcases in it, covered in blood.
Lucy was airlifted to hospital outside Jerusalem, but died.
Two Israeli sisters who were killed in a gun attack on the West Bank on Friday has died of wounds she sustained.
Their father and siblings were further up the road ahead of them.
So, Rabbi Dee, thank you very much for agreeing to spend time with us in your beautiful home in Efrat. And I join with all of Am Yisrael and really beyond the Jewish people to the whole world whose heart beats with yours and continues to do so since the tragedy, the brutal murder of your wife, Lucy, and of Maia and Rina. I personally have spent hours and hours, thousands of hours interviewing Holocaust survivors, and my biggest question for survivors is how they carried on. And in particular, I asked religious people, when God, as it were, abandoned you, how did you manage to, why didn't you abandon him? So I know that's a heavy question, but I'll ask that as a first question. You're somebody who chose to have a relationship with God, with Hashem. That's not necessarily the way you grew up. You together with Lucy built that type of home, and then suddenly on Chol HaMoed Pesach this year, it was all thrown apart. But somehow, instead of being a victim, you've become a teacher of the world.
Thank you, Naftali. Strange enough, on the flight back from London this week, I was reading the biography of Rabbi Hugo Grin, and I was brought up in, as you mentioned, in the Reform in the West London Synagogue. And he was a Holocaust survivor, and he was my first experience of a rabbi. And in the book, he quotes something which I must have heard him say a number of times, which was when he was asked, did he lose faith in God in the Shoah? He said, no, I lost faith in man. And Rabbi Sachs would say that out of the Nazis at Wannsee, who voted on the final solution, the majority of them had PhDs from Heidelberg University. And therefore, one looks at secular culture and one can criticize it heavily as to how secular culture can allow this to happen. But I don't think that God can be blamed.
What role has religion played in the last few months in your life?
It's interesting. Through my shiva, we had a number of people, as you might have seen. One of them was particularly outstanding, a guy called Yaniv Moded. And he walked in, a little bit stiff-looking walk. He, a year and a half ago, lost his wife and two children, his whole family, in a car crash in the West Bank. It was a semi-terrorist event in the sense that there was an Arab car that did a strange maneuver. He came in with such a simchat chayim, such a positive attitude, that I said to myself, I must meet up with him. And I sort of made a note to sort of, once I got through this whole process, the first process. And about 2 weeks ago, I contacted him and I went and visited him. And I said to him, what is it that that helped you through this very difficult situation? And it turned out that he'd been a teacher of Torah in his career, and he'd focused very much on emunah. And I had also studied a lot of emunah, and I think that was the one thing we had in common. So that's something which helped him through, and I think something which helped me through, and it was an eye-opener for me to see that probably was one of the decisive factors in being able to see through this particular situation.
How do you answer the question? How does God allow bad things happen to good people?
So on Tikkun Leil Shavuot, I had the opportunity to go and listen to Rav Baruch Efrati, who's a friend of mine, and he was speaking in one of the shuls here, and I just spotted the headline of the talk, which was, why do bad things happen to good people? And he didn't expect me to turn up, perhaps, to the talk, but I did. And he said the following. He said that if one says that this world is a corridor to the world to come, and that the true life is the life in the world to come, and that this world is an opportunity to show aspects of emunah, aspects of faith in Hashem and a closeness to Hashem. So he said, when does one have the opportunity to show closeness to Hashem more? When does one call out to Hashem more? Is it when one has an easy life or challenges? So he said, well, actually, it's when you have challenges. So he said, therefore, the question should not be why do bad things happen to good people, but it should be why should good things happen to good people? In other words, if someone's a tzaddik, why did they not get tested in their life? That was his conclusion. So I think it spoke to me, but I'm not sure if it answers anyone's questions at all.
We were talking before, and you told me that you actually met Lucy on Shavuot, the night of Shavuot. As you know from your time in England, one of the organisations we have there is called GIFT, Give It Forward Today. And I know that Lucy was an incredibly giving person. Can you talk a little bit about that, about Lucy's brand of giving?
She was the Rebbitzin, and I was her sidekick. So it was we strangely were employed in England for 6 years as a rabbinical couple. And I think that was very appropriate because it really wasn't the rabbi and his Rebbitzin, it was really the Rebbitzin and me. And she built up communities. I mean, when we were in the suburb, before we came to Israel, before I studied Smicha, she was the one who started the Chaverim minyan, effectively. She decided that there was an opportunity there for young couples to get together. She organized dinners and kiddushim and so forth, and she created a committee. And by the time we left and came to Israel in 2004, the Chaverim minyan was just about to start. And we came back 4 years later. We were surprised to see that it was flourishing and people had really run with it. So she was someone who was able to seed a community, effectively. So when we went to Hendon, she was very much involved in organizing events for Yom Tov and celebrations for Hanukkah, for Purim, and for many different things. We always had guests from the community at our Shabbos table, and in Radlett the same thing. She really was very fixed on building the community. She was absolutely a powerhouse of giving.
Do you think giving can be taught?
Yes, I think so. I think that she taught our kids how to give as well. I think one of the things that Lucy did was she was fiercely independent. And she taught our kids to be independent. I think in order to be able to give, you have to be very confident in yourself, because some people feel that if they give, they can lose a little bit from themselves. As Rabbi Sachs puts it, giving, is actually something which is not sort of I give and you take. It's actually, it's a win-win. So I win and you win and I lose. It's actually I grow and you grow from the giving. But in order to get to that perspective, I think you have to be very self-confident and very sort of proud of who you are. And that was something which she endowed the kids with.
One of the primary revealed attributes of Hashem is giving. So when you describe Lucy as fiercely independent, which I remember, I was telling you she was on an age program in 1995, and I think she took what she got from it, but then went her own direction because she was so independent. So I guess to be a giver, if giving is one of these primary revealed midot of Hashem, then Hashem is obviously the ultimate independent. So I guess that's why independence goes. It's
interesting. Her favorite Devar Torah was on the word v'natnu, which is a palindrome, which is read the same forwards and backwards. And she would always say that when you give, you receive back. And that's been our experience. I mean, we made the decision, as you know, to donate her organs. The kids really made the decision, as I said, because we're now a family committee of 4, 2 girls, me and Yehuda, and a 14-year-old boy doesn't have an opinion on anything. So they made the decision. I'd already discussed it actually with Lucy, just hypothetically, months before. And we both agreed that we would want to donate organs if there was a halachic way of doing so. So we knew that would have been a wish. And when we went to Bellington Hospital to meet the recipients 2 months later, expecting to actually walk into their hospital rooms and see them lying on beds with drips on them, kidney recipients and liver and lungs and so forth. And they walked in like healthy human beings after 2 months, which was just incredible. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel, and the kids didn't know how they were going to feel. We thought maybe we'd cry, we'd be find it upsetting. In fact, it was tremendously comforting to see them. And it was very much Lucy's concept of v'natnu, that, she gave and we felt a million times return for the giving.
Do you think, you said she was fiercely independent, and it's clear that you are, everything you've done since is also incredibly independent. Nature or nurture? Are you self-taught? Were both of you self-taught in that, or is that the way you were brought up?
We both had challenges in our childhood. Her parents broke up when she was 12, and she had to become independent, looking after her 3-year-old twin sisters as the prime carer for much of the time, till she was 18. I actually look back at my life, and I thought it was pretty much blessed. But I'd forgotten one particular element, which was I was bullied very severely at high school from the age of 12 to 13. I was a year ahead, and I was the youngest in the class. I was one of the few Jews in the class. And I was the top of the class, which was not a good combination in any way. And I would walk into school every day for 2 years, and my satchel would be thrown around the room. I'd have spitballs fired at me all through the lessons. It was very unpleasant until one day they threatened to throw me down the stairwell, and then I came home and cried for the first time to my parents. And then the headmaster got involved, and it was sorted out. But I guess through that period, I learned that I couldn't depend on the teachers. I couldn't depend on the headmaster. I couldn't depend on my colleagues at school. And I guess I became quite independent. I also, looking back, I thank Hashem for that experience, which I didn't obviously at the time, but I realized that I learned to deal with trauma at a young age, and that probably gave me some tools which I was able to draw on later on.
And your children are giving, in their own right. Tell me about the children.
Baruch Hashem, they're all giving in their different ways. And Karen, as you know, is in a Beit Yeled, which I guess is a home for abused kids in Gilo in Jerusalem. And there's a number of flats with 12 boys or girls of different ages, all living together with a religious couple, and she is a Bat Sharut, so she's a volunteer doing her national service, living in a separate flat with 15 girls, and she comes in with 2 girls. The 2 of them come in every day. They wake up the kids. They do breakfast with them. They come back in the afternoon. They are basically in loco parentis, and she's there, pretty much 24/7 for these kids, giving all the time.
And Tali?
Tali is giving a different way. She is one of a handful of religious girls in the history of the State of Israel who've got into the Air Force. And she wants to be a pilot. And I didn't discourage it because I thought the chances were so low, it wasn't worth even having the conversation. And then she told me she's got in. So that's Tali's way of giving. That's a 7-year commitment of her time. And Yehuda's 14. And 14-year-old boy.
I always think, one of the expressions, at least in English, is to give thanks. Yehuda is the essence of Yehuda is to give thanks. Tov L'Hodot. It's Yehudi. That's.
I think there's a Rashi who says that Leah, Lucy's Leah, named her son Yehuda because every time she called the name Yehuda, she could thank Hashem, and maybe that was part of Lucy's idea.
Why did you decide, relatively late in life, to become a rabbi and a rebbitzin? So
I would have answered that question differently about 3 months ago. I would have said it was something to do with my personal drive to develop as a person. I was working in private equity. I had a very high-flying job in the city. And when I was promoted to director of the company, the next day I quit and said, I'm going to Israel to study to be a rabbi. And now I would tell you that I think the reality was that Lucy had her impact on me over the 7 years that we'd been married up to that point. And I think she'd influenced me, and I'd been persuaded by her to go and do something more meaningful with my life than just earn money. I don't want to lead the witness too much, but is that meaning connected also with giving to other people? I guess one can get academic qualifications, and being a rabbi is also an academic qualification, and it can be meaningful and purposeful for yourself. You're growing in yourself. But what's the balance between self and other in being a rabbi? You're an educator. You teach. So we went to Israel in order that I would become a community rabbi, and that was the decision, that we wanted to give back to the Jewish community in England. We also felt that there was an opportunity there because from what we'd seen, they needed more dati lemi, so modern Orthodox rabbis. And there was a shortage. And when I looked into why that was, because if you're brought up in a modern Orthodox home, you have the opportunity to become a doctor, lawyer, and accountant, and therefore you get paid, 5 times more. And that's the reason that there are very few modern Orthodox rabbis. But we felt that we had the opportunity to be that.
Which is like, I'm actually speaking this afternoon somewhere, and I was thinking, Moed Katan is about Yom Tov, but it's also about Avilut.
Right.
And I don't know the connection. It's.
I'll tell the connection. You asked me the connection between Yom Tov and Evelut. It's very relevant to us because this happened on the first day of Chol HaMoed Pesach. And during the Shiva, I was struggling with the question, why did this happen in this particular way? Because as a rabbi, you know that if somebody passes away, Rahman al-Islam, Erev Rosh Hashanah, there's no Shiva. They sit for an hour or so, and then the Shiva is cancelled. And every rabbi tells the family the same idea, which is that your father, your mother, didn't want you to suffer, didn't want you to have to sit Shiva. They want you to be happy, and therefore, this is how it worked out. That's a standard answer for that particular scenario. But our scenario was different because we were Pesach, Seder night, the height of happiness in the year. And then we were down to sort of Chol HaMoed, which is also a happy period. And then suddenly we were in Aninut and Levaya, so that was the lowest you can be. And then the next minute, we were straight back into Chol HaMoed. And then we were down to another Levaya, and then back to Chol HaMoed, then to Shvi Shel Pesach, 7th day Pesach, and then down to the Shiva, and then straight back to Shabbat. And our experience was like a zigzag of Avelut interweaved with Yom Tov. So I was asking the question, why did that happen to us, and what was the message? And everyone who came to the Shiva at the beginning, I was asking the question, and came to Benny Gantz, who came and sat down the Shiva, and I said the same to him. And he looked at me and he said, I'll tell you why. He said, God is telling you that in your life from now on, you're going to have happiness and sadness, you're going to have to weave them together. I looked at him and I said, thank you, Rav Benny. So he said, why Rav Benny? I said, because somebody teaches you one Devar Torah is your Rav. So now when I've seen him on a few other occasions, I refer to him as Rav Benny. But I think that our experiences, we have to be happy. I have to be happy for the kids. I have to be happy because that's life. But it's interwoven with sadness.
It is, I guess, in Simcha Katarat Sfekot. And it seems to be, I mean, very powerfully talking to you that you have clarity on what life is about. And I guess that clarity, even amidst the Avalud, there's a simcha to it. There's a closeness. There's a dvekut. There's a it says shlosha shutafim ba'adam. The parents, the 3 partners, the parents and Hashem. Somebody said to me actually when I was sitting shiva to a parent, it's only fair if Hashem takes somebody away that he comes closer. It seems to me that you even though I asked the question before, like where is God, it seems to be that your connection maybe is even closer. Your emunah, your clarity.
I think so. I mean, one of the things that goes through my mind at the moment is that in our lives we have a limited amount of tzoros, of challenges. And even though our challenges are greater than most people's, one can count the number of challenges one has on one hand or 2 hands, or if you're unlucky, a few hands. But the number of blessings that we have is infinite. As Rabbi Efrat Goldberg says often in his shirim, you wake up in the morning, gravity works for you. You put your feet on the ground. That's a miracle. He says you take a breath of air, your lungs are working, there's oxygen in the air, that's a miracle. The sun rises and gives you heat and makes the plants grow, that's a miracle. Everything that we do is suffused with miracles. We don't notice them because we're so used to them. So there's an infinite amount of miracles in our lives and a limited amount of challenges.
How do you know there's a limited amount of challenges?
I just experienced that. If you ask anybody what are the challenges of life, they could probably list them out for you. And the ones they can't remember are probably not challenges. So one's conscious of those challenges.
So I was in the synagogue. I was in the shul this morning where you were leading the prayers, and I noticed that when you're praying, you go like this a lot. What are you thinking when you do that?
It's a new phenomenon in my prayer, but certain of the prayers speak to me louder now than before. So when I talk, when I say Ratzeh, At the moment, I'm thinking about the Binyan Beit HaMikdash, and I think that is something which should be Bimhera B'Yameinu. And whether that's something which comes from the experience I've had, or whether it's a clarity that I've had, I don't know.
What prayers do you relate to most? It's a personal question.
Right. So during the Shiva, I was reading Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzva'akot Melech La'aretz Kvodo, and I suddenly had a realization: Kadosh is Lucy, Kadosh is Maia, Kadosh is Rina, and because of them, the whole world will be full of God's glory. That this, is the holiness of Lucy, Maia, and Rina, is that somehow people have connected to them, and this is an opportunity for the whole world to learn about God's glory. And that's my task, I think, at this point, is to help spread their messages to the world.
Which are? What are the salient messages of the...
Well, I think that Lucy, her name, interestingly, in Latin, means light, and she spread light. That was really her one of her blessings to people. We had a birthday party for her a few weeks ago and invited friends of hers to talk about her. And each one, in their turn, expressed how she had seen a spark in them and encouraged them to bring it out. So she saw the light and she asked them to spread it. Maia's name means water of Hashem, which refers to the Torah. And she was passionate about spreading Torah. And in fact, in her school she was volunteering in for national service, she started a program on Thursday break time for Year 9 girls, which she called Nishnosh Parsh, which was a 10-minute voluntary session in the break time. She'd invite girls, give them a 5-minute Devat in the Parsha of the Shavua, and she'd buy snacks for them, and they'd sit there and eat snacks and to have a little social and learn a bit about the Torah portion. Since this happened, the school has spread this initiative to 520 other schools in Israel, and it's going on now around the country. And my dream would be to actually spread it to England and to America if we could get that word out there.
Nishnosh.
Nishnosh Parsh.
Parsh.
Nishnosh is snack in Hebrew and Parsh. So Rina, interestingly, we named her after that perek in Tehillim, Shir Malot, that we say before benching. It's the only perek in Tanakh where the word Rina appears 3 times. And if you look at the meaning of Rina, and I said this at her Simchat Bat, Rina is a type of happiness that relates to looking forward to the future, to the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And as I described at the Simchat Bat, it's the happiness you have when you're singing in the shower, when you're looking forward to something that's about to happen. You met the girl of your dreams and you're about to propose, or you've got a job offer which you're looking forward to. That's the sense of Rina, of anticipation of the future. And strangely enough, Rina went to a quite right-wing Jewish school in Kiryat Arba, near Hebron. And because of the fact that a lot of the girls had had relatives who had been murdered by Arab terrorists, the feeling towards Arabs in that school was not very positive. And Rina, when she came back from school, she would always ask me about my feeling towards Arabs and towards a peace process, and I'd always have to argue with her why I was positive towards it, and she would give me all the arguments about why there was no hope and why that the Palestinians would never agree to anything. And so when this happened, and about 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, Tali and Karen invited Rina's friends and Maia's friends for a Shabbos lunch in our home. And I had the opportunity to talk to some of them around the Shabbos table. I said to them, what was a feature of Rina that was particularly unique? And they all said she was the only girl who would speak up for the Palestinians at Kiryat Arba. She said, against all the pressure. And I was completely shocked because she was the one of my kids who was the most anti-Arab, apparently, when we were speaking. And it turns out she was doing that in order to learn all the arguments so she could feed them back to her friends. And so she was very much looking forward to a time when there would be shalom. And that was Rina, I think, one of her amazing attributes.
And that's the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. You mentioned something to me before that maybe is worthwhile to mention again. I said, to doing things Li'ilui Nishmat, to elevate the soul of people who've passed away. And you said something to me.
So Rabbi Shapiro of Ramat Gan Yeshiva came to speak in this community, and he said, he quoted the Gemara that says that those who die b'kiddush Hashem are in a different sphere to anyone else in Shemayim and way above Talmidei Chachamim, such that he said that Rav Karo, who was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, apparently said when he was on his deathbed that his only regret was that he didn't have the opportunity to die b'kiddush Hashem. And he said that, it's not appropriate to do anything for Lucy and Maia and Rina, le'ilun nishmatan, because they are at the highest possible level in Shemayim, next to the Kisei Kavod. He said, however, what we do for them should be le'ilun nishmatenu, and that effectively there's like a mirror in Shemayim, and everything that we're doing in their name is getting reflected back and elevating us. And that spoke to me.
And you're still saying Kaddish, even though maybe halachically you don't need to. Maybe when you say Kaddish, many Jews, even if they don't do many other, parts of observance or mitzvot, they say Kaddish. When Leo Dee says Kaddish for Lucy and Maia and Rina, what do you think when you're saying?
So in the light of what Rabbi Shapiro said, they don't need Kaddish. And if we didn't say Kaddish, would make any difference. If we don't like Yatzat candles, doesn't make any difference. So there's nothing that we need to do for the Eloi Nishmatan. And I actually, people ask me sometimes, how I could be in any way able to deal with this and to somehow represent the Jewish people at this point. And I said to them, I think that's the pshat of Kaddish. That's the meaning of Kaddish. Why? Because you take a mourner who's just lost a very close member of their family or more, and you stick them in the middle of the tzibur as a shliach tzibur, and you get them to daven from the amud for the whole kehillah. And you think to yourself, why should they be there? I mean, they're the last person in the world who could possibly speak about God's greatness when they've just had this terrible tragedy and they've lost a loved one. And yet the rabbis stick them right in the middle of the shul and demand that they lead the service. And I think the reason is that actually the person who is the Avel is there in order to inspire everybody else, because people should look at that person and say, look, if that person, after what they've been through, is able to still say, Yid Gadal V'Yid Kadash, Hashem's name should be great, then who are we in our situation to deny that? So I think that there's a chiyuv, a requirement on every mourner to stand up and be an example to everybody else.
What does it mean, Yid Gadal V'Yid Kadash Merabah? What's that prayer saying? Why is that the sum total of a Jew's life when a Jew passes away, or whatever the circumstances, the mourners say Yid Gadal? What does it mean? What does it mean when?
I think first of all it's a statement of emunah, right? In other words, that this person who really should have no emunah is specifically the person who is demanded to show emunah. I believe that God is the greatest and is all powerful. And I hold no grudge against Hashem. But I think, there are other explanations. I usually would explain to people when I went into a Shiva house, my understanding, which is that a loved one's soul has been taken out of their body and their physical presence is no longer here with us. And therefore, since the souls of the Jewish people in this world are are an aspect of Hashem, maybe the souls of all people are an aspect of Hashem, one part of Hashem is now less visible to humanity. And therefore, in order to compensate for that loss, one has to sort of demand that Hashem's name is made great, and that we remember that person's unique qualities, and that's part of retaining that aspect of Hashem, which has now been physically lost from the world.
As we're talking, I mentioned before that we have in English, we say to give thanks. And one of the things that you were talking about in the connection with Rina was shalom with other people. I was thinking that in Hebrew we also say nitzinat shalom, or we say ten yad, give a hand, like to give peace. When we wish others, when we say shalom to someone, we're not just saying hello, you're giving a blessing of shalom. Well, one of the most remarkable things that you have done in the last 3 months, and I know you're involved with now, is you want to give shalom to the world. You want to bring about shalom. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Maybe on a higher plane than the political one.
Okay, so strangely, Naftali, when I was at Radlett, when Lucy and I were at Radlett, we had the honor and the opportunity to have 150 bar and bat mitzvahs in 3 years. So you can work that out, the maths. There was one a week for every day, every week that we were in Radlett. So very quickly, Lucy and I realized that was our calling to be in Radlett, was to educate these bar and bat mitzvahs. Now, Radlett is not a traditionally observant community. I say that because they're very strong in giving, actually, which is a major mitzvah in the Torah. So they were charedim when it came to giving. When it came to Shabbat and it came to kashrut, they were not the most. The vast majority of those bar and bat mitzvah kids were not going to come back to shul probably for a number of years until their wedding, if they married a Jewish spouse, which, based on the statistics of that community, was probably not such a high number. And so I decided to learn with the bar mitzvah boys one-on-one twice before each one's bar mitzvah, which is a large commitment in a community like that. And I thought to myself, what topic should I learn with them? So I thought very quickly that there was only one topic that made any sense to me to learn with these kids who may never come back to shul, and certainly would never have an opportunity to learn one-to-one with a rabbi again. And that was, why be Jewish? And I broke it up into two sessions. Number one, what's in it for me, Chaim Cohen, to be Jewish in my life? Why does it make me happy? And number two, why does it make sense for there to be Jews in the world? Why is it good for the world that there are Jews? And after I left Radlett, I wrote them down in a book, published it. It's called Transforming the World. And I don't know if I gave you a copy yet, but I can give you a copy later today, remind me.
It's available on Amazon. I looked up on wherever
on Amazon. Soon coming out in paperback. But when I wrote it down, I discovered something which I hadn't fully understood when I was teaching it, which is that the answer to both those questions is shalom. In other words, why be Jewish? Because it gives you shalom pnimit, internal shalom. Makes you happy, which is a sort of feeling of contentment and shalom, of peace, internal peace. And why do there need to be Jews in the world? Because Jews create peace in the world. And I prove that and describe it in the book. In fact, at the beginning of the book, I make an apology to those people who say that one shouldn't look at the meaning of mitzvot, because the only meaning for mitzvot is to get close to Hashem. And therefore, if you try and find any practical meaning beyond that, you're actually diminishing the meaning of the mitzvot. And I made that sort of caveat at the beginning, and I said, this is only one aspect. Now, when I look back, I realize that actually one of the names of Hashem is Shalom. So therefore, to say that the purpose of mitzvot is Shalom is no contradiction whatsoever. In fact, that is, to find Hashem in our lives, inside and in the world. So actually, now I should remove that, although I haven't. But Shalom is something which drives me as a purpose, and I think it's something which I would like to dedicate the rest of my life to. I think that probably as Jews, one is commanded to.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? We're on the verge of the 3 weeks. I guess we don't have a Bet Mikdash, and we don't have unity in the Jewish people because we don't have shalom. So, Rabbi Leo Dee, how do we bring about shalom?
I'd like to give you one idea, practical idea. Strangely, one of the things that one is not allowed to do on Tish B'Av, which differentiates it very much from Yom Kippur, is one's not allowed to say shalom. It's a very strange halacha that if one says shalom to someone, or somebody says shalom to you, you're meant to whisper it back. So when someone's allowed to greet somebody else with the word shalom on Tish B'Av, so it always puzzled me why that should be and what could be the learning from it. And I think that we don't, we're very careful not to greet people on Tish B'Av. But I'm not sure that's really the message. I think the message is that we should be saying shalom to people every other day, 364 days a year. And it's only on Tish B'Av that we don't say shalom. So I always wanted to implement it, and I never got around to it in Radlett, a policy that at the beginning of the 3 weeks, we have posters in schools and in communities saying, please make an extra special effort to greet people, strangers in the street, in the shul, and welcome people and to say shalom to them for the 3 weeks. So that when you get to Tish B'Av and you're not allowed to say shalom, you feel the pain of not being able to say that shalom. And that's the message of Tisha B'Av. Unfortunately, because we've grown so accustomed not to say shalom to people every other day of the year, we don't feel that pain. And it just becomes like any other day that we say shalom to someone, and we ignore people when we see them. So could we implement a strategy, maybe not in the 3 weeks, maybe it's too late, maybe the 9 days. So say from Rosh Chodesh Av, that it becomes a norm to make an extra special effort to greet people, strangers, and to introduce yourself to other people in the community who maybe you haven't spoken to before. Because that's the message, I think, of Tisha B'Av.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about I know I am. For all I know of you, yes, your aspiration is to bring shalom across the whole world. But let me ask you, closer to home, in Israel today, is ripped apart by internal strife.
So first of all, I take. And what's the word? I disagree with that assumption. There's an assumption that Israel's ripped apart by strife. And if you look at the reform marches for and against reform, which is the example that people give, it's very interesting. I'll tell you a story. About 3-4 weeks ago, an organization called me up and said, would you please participate in a Zoom call with other parents of pairs of children who were killed in piguos, in attacks in the last month or two. And so there were 3 families who lost pairs of children in these attacks, and I was one. And the idea of the call apparently was to come up with some sort of joint project about achdut, about unity for the Jewish people that we could all agree to and we could push forward. The first parent spoke and said, what we need is a kenes, a large conference, invite thousands of people and talk about unity. The second person said, no, I don't agree. I think what we need is to put out some YouTube videos about the concept of unity, and we all come together and we produce these together. And the third person said, no, what actually we need is people to march down the streets together, bring people together with a common purpose, for example, to free the Palestinian people from their evil regime. And we couldn't agree. So we all argued our points for an hour. And at the end of it, we were just about to finish. And I said, can I have the last word? Because I'm a rabbi. And I said, you know what? I said, we've been arguing about how to create unity. And on the face of it, we've had no unity for an hour. We've not agreed with anything. I said, but actually, we've demonstrated the ultimate unity, achdut. I said, we didn't demonstrate achidut, which is uniformity. Right? We all had different ways of doing it. But the fact was, we dedicated 1 hour of our time, and we're all busy people, to talk about how we would create unity. We had the same purpose, which was, we had different ways of doing it. That's fine. 1 Jew, 3 opinions. So, but we had the ultimate unity. And I think we learned this, also in the current situation, with the Jews marching for reform and the Jews marching against reform. There was a famous Facebook post, which was true, may not have happened, which went round virally about 3-4 weeks ago. And it was a story of a guy in Jerusalem who wanted to go on the march for reform. So he turned to his neighbor next door and he said, look, I need to borrow your flag to go on the march for reform. So his neighbor said, with pleasure. He said, but I need it back tonight because tomorrow morning I'm going to Tel Aviv to march against reform. And whether this was true or not, it was true enough that everybody's distributed on the left and on the right. And I think that, you know, the fact that the Jewish people are marching with the same flag, and if you ask them, they'll say, we are doing this for the benefit of the Israeli people. We believe this is the right way forward, and we want to create a strong Israel going forwards. That is the ultimate test of unity. We have the same purpose, both sides. Now, the only way that it could be perhaps better than it is at the moment is if both sides could march together down the streets of Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, half of them with one flag, saying pro-reform, half of them against reform, all of them with the Israeli flag. And that is ultimately the ultimate sense of unity. We have never had greater unity in Israel than we have seen in the last few weeks. So it's a question of perspective, I think.
Isn't it a bit naive? You are far from naive, but isn't it a bit naive to say, I mean, you've seen the demonstrations, and in the same, well, I'm not comparing them at all, but you've seen the Jews of Israel and the Palestinians. Parallel marches does not mean shalom, does it? It's like I studied international relations, and at that time in LSE it was the balance of power. Basically Russia and America facing off means that nobody's going to press the button because it's mad. Mutually assured destruction. That's not the Jewish notion.
Okay, so Naftali, I make a distinction between peace and shalom. So peace is a little bit like a mosaic. Every little element has to be a square, exactly the same shaped square. So maybe you can have slightly different colors, but everything has to fit into a rigid structure, which is very monotonous. Shalom is more like a jigsaw puzzle. that the pieces can be completely different and they'll fit together if they're in the right format. And that's shalom. And what does that mean? Those of us who during COVID did a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle like we did will know that if you try and do it on a tablecloth that is not straight, then over the bumps you can't do it at all. The whole thing falls apart. Therefore, you have to iron out the wrinkles in order to actually even start with shalom. Whereas a mosaic can be done even on a quite rough surface. So with shalom, there's a precondition that you get rid of the wrinkles. So when it comes to world peace, you have to get rid of terror and terrorists. And then you can start talking about shalom. So in my opinion, and just a sort of preview to the shalom plan that I'm discussing at the moment with different people, is that we don't actually negotiate with the terrorists and with the leaders of these regimes who are completely corrupt and evil. But actually the people underneath will fit in very nicely in a jigsaw puzzle and will create peace, shalom. Peace is impossible because peace assumes that you can stick these terrorists into a nice little square and stick them into the design without getting rid of the crinkles. And that's impossible. So I think that the Jewish concept of shalom is very different to the non-Jewish concept of peace, and we need to understand the difference. And one of my objectives through this process would be to change the Oxford English Dictionary definition of shalom. Believe it or not, the word shalom appears in the Oxford English Dictionary translated as peace. I would like to get that deleted and a more sophisticated translation of shalom, because I think people have to understand that there is no word in English for shalom, and that's why we haven't achieved, the world powers have not achieved peace or the shalom in Israel, because the concept doesn't exist. And what we need to do is educate them as to what that would mean for us and therefore for the world.
The shalom is I guess is integration of complementary and often opposing parts, but coming together to form something complete.
That's right, but it can't be done if people have got guns and are shooting innocent civilians. So those people have to be removed from the picture before one can even have the conversation. And one shouldn't be negotiating with them, which is what one is doing at the moment, trying to create a peace plan, which is impractical and will never happen. And
I'm just going to circle back to one last. So in our subject, what was about giving, and Lucy, Maia, and Rina were such giving people, and after that, which you have shown the whole world, is to keep on giving, even when something so dear and precious has been taken away. So in an I-dominated world where everything is about I and me, how do you actually teach people the pleasure, the beauty, the rational underpinning of life is about giving? How do we teach people to give when they think that my time, my money, my body, everything, it's mine?
I think that, and you probably had the same experience with Gift and other initiatives that you do anyway, that people, when they experience the feeling of giving, they feel that v'natnu, the feeling that they get much back, so much more than they put in. It's really experiential. And a little bit like Shabbat, that if you explain to somebody, that turning off your phone for 25 hours and not using computers and not driving and not going out for restaurants would be a positive experience, it doesn't make any sense logically to someone whose the whole idea of rest is going out to see friends and going to the cinema and going to the football game. But somebody who has experienced it will be able to understand it without perhaps being able to describe it. And I think the same with giving, that if people are given the opportunity to give, the more they give, the more they'll feel that tremendous feeling of satisfaction, of shalom. And that is the ultimate sort of education. It's experiential.
I'm going to push a little bit further on this one, because when we started Gift, I was thinking in my head that the Sefer Chinuch talks about one of his Ta'amei HaMitzvot, many positive commandments, is Acharei HaMa'asim Nimshachim HaLevavot. That our attitudes and the way we are follow what we do. So our theory was, you get people giving and experience giving, they will become givers. It's a little bit like Na'aseh v'nishma. Yeah,
okay.
But I feel, and maybe strike me down for it, that it's too subtle. It people don't necessarily become what they do. I'm interested if you've got an idea or something deeper. How do you teach people beyond just getting them to do? Because they might not internalize the attitude and it might not be such a change.
You say Na'aseh v'nishma. I was teaching before this all happened in a secular school and giving a Beit Midrash program to secular kids in Jerusalem. And I explained to them, I think it was Plato, who said that our thoughts are the most important things because they drive our actions. And I said, in contrast, Na'aseh v'nishma, right? The Jewish philosophy is that actually our actions will actually create the correct thoughts. And there's some interesting research that was done by an American researcher on morality. I forget his name, Jewish guy. And he looked at books that were not returned to libraries in America. And he found that one of the worst offenders was the morality section of libraries. The books were not being returned. And not only that, within that section, morality books that were specifically for master's and PhD student level morality students. So he shows from this that, it's Jonathan Haidt is the guy who wrote this in a book called Morality, recommended by Chief Rabbi Sachs, and I bought a copy. He shows from this that studying morality has no impact whatsoever, in fact, maybe a negative impact on one's behavior. And the Jewish perspective is, actually mitzvot are designed in order to create this. So I'll give you an example. When we came back from Israel, and Maia and Karen were like 6 and 5 years old, and we went to Tesco's for the first time, and we got to the checkout we went to the checkout at Tesco's, and they had all these jellies on display in beautiful packaging. And they grabbed one and they said, "Daddy, can we have this?" And I looked at the ingredients. I saw that it contained some non-kosher ingredients. And I said, "Look, I'm sorry, they're not kosher." So they said, "Fine." They put them back on the shelf, and that was that. And I thought to myself, isn't it amazing that my 5-year-old, 6 and 6-year-old kid can be told that it's not kosher, which is a concept, which was really quite a deep concept. And yet they know these sweets are delicious, and they're still prepared to put them down without an argument just because they're kosher. And the mitzvot train us in a way, just they get us regulated effectively by just the conditioned.
Or maybe it's the hybrid model. Maybe it was that it's both.
Yeah, but saying the bracha, the action, the experiential aspect of saying the bracha, of preparing food in a particular way and selecting and thinking about it. But
it could be it's both of them together. Maybe that's
It's an integrated model. So if one thinks of this of Torah and one does the Maasim, then together that gives us a greater understanding and ability to.
The good news is, I think you might have been talking about jelly tots, which have just come back on the kosher list. So they're okay now.
Well, I can tell you something, a sort of another plug. My cousin runs Swizzle's Matlow, which is one of the largest sweet companies in England, and they've just brought out a kosher range of chews, which are absolutely delicious. So these were the chews that were previously not kosher, now all have kosher ingredients and are available with a hefsher, and are coming to a sweet shop near you. So.
Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe that's to end this incredible time with you on a note of sweetness, which, how does it say? From the Mar comes Matok, Alavai.
I was referred to as Naomi for some reason over Shabbat, and I thought about the fact that when she returned from back to Bethlehem, which was basically Efrat, that she was referred to as Mar, as bitter, because of what had happened to us. So I felt that there was a connection there, that coming back from our attempted holiday in the north, with all this having happened, there was an aspect of Naomi in the whole experience.
Mm. Thank you, Rabbi Dee. Thank you. Hashem should bless you. Yaseh shalom aleinu, Kol Yisrael, and the whole world. Please God. Thank you very much.